Good afternoon, everybody. I am Sarah Paulson, and welcome to today's episode of Diary of a CIO. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Charlotte Light this afternoon. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hello, thank you.
No worries at all. So a very quick intro to Charlotte before we get on with the questions. Charlotte is the Chief Digital Officer at Aztec Group, where she leads the company's technology transformation efforts and team. Appointed in 2020, Charlotte plays a crucial role in advancing the group's digital strategy. Before joining Aztec, Charlotte was Chief Information Officer at Channel 4 for 4 years, where she spearheaded a broad digital change programme. And prior to that, Charlotte was IT Director at Specsavers. So needless to say, Charlotte has a very broad career and a real diverse background in leading technology teams across various disciplines and industries. In recognition of her achievements, Charlotte was named as one of the UK's 50 most influential women in technology by Computer Weekly, and she's also an advisory board member of the Institute of Coding. So very busy at work. Outside of work, Charlotte is mum to a teenage boy, loves to cook and travel to Africa when time allows with her husband, who is South African, and also makes attempts to stay fit alongside everything else. So a busy lady by the sounds of it, Charlotte.
Yeah, that sort of captured me in a nutshell. I'm impressed.
Good. So I'm going to kick off with my first question. Obviously, your current title is Chief Digital Officer, but you've done the role of CIO prior to that. So when did you know you wanted to become a CIO, CDO, and what was the biggest risk you had to take to get there?
I think I've talked to people about my career being one of where I'm a bit of an accidental tourist in some sense, because I didn't start off intending to work in technology at all. In my first 10 years where I worked at IBM, I worked in sales, and I worked as a consultant, and I worked in marketing. So I had a lot of business roles, but obviously working for a tech company. And at that point, I was really just experimenting with lots of different jobs and trying to establish what was I good at and what did I enjoy and how did I want to spend my time. And after 9 years, I moved I went to work at Bupa actually, and went sort of client side, as you would describe from an industry perspective. And again, sort of did a number of different jobs, but more working within technology. And I hadn't ever thought about being a CIO or a CTO or running a technology shop, because I assumed to do that you would need to have some kind of qualification in sort of computing or be able to write code, neither of which are true of me in terms of capabilities. But as I worked through some of those early jobs at Bupa and moved into head of business systems at Specsavers before becoming IT director, I started to realize that a lot of what's required for technology to be successfully implemented for organizations and for organizations to get the most out of tech is to have someone who can be practical and pragmatic, who's confident making decisions, who's a good communicator, who can form lots of relationships, who's organized, who's sort of got broad spectrum interests. And I could see that they were all things that I have in spades, and therefore they're things that I could bring to bear that perhaps some of the people with a computer science degree or sort of, deep coding expertise might not be able to bring to bear. And as technology has evolved as rapidly as it has, fortunately for me, those skills around relationships and communication and sort of being a change agent and being able to communicate well have become increasingly important from a CIO perspective. And so it's a sort of combination of backing myself and then timing. And I think when I was early in my career, it was about getting as many experiences as possible. And probably by the time I got to Specsavers, I started to think 5-year plan. So I'm a head of systems. I'd like to be an IT director by X. And then actually, I'd just like to be in charge and be a CIO by Y. And you sort of set yourself those horizons to sort of say, well, okay, now what do I need to do in terms of developing myself? or promoting myself in order to achieve those thresholds. And so that's what I did. And that's kind of how it happened, which, was great. It's been great for me. And now I'm running the IT function, and there are things I'm really good at. And then I think an aspect of being successful is building a team around you that bridge your gaps. So obviously I have some significant technology gaps, but I have some brilliant technologists in my leadership team. And they bridge those gaps for me.
And it's quite interesting that you kind of had that plan, that you knew you wanted to progress and kind of achieve more. What's next for you then? Is there kind of something that you're striving towards now in terms of changing your role, or do you kind of feel that this is your sweet spot, so to speak?
I think I have landed in a place where I'm now still fully stretched, because you don't want to, being comfortable isn't necessarily interesting, or it isn't for me. It's for some people want to focus on operating something really well. But I'm really interested in driving change. So, and also, I'm 52. You sort of get to the point where your level of ambition for progression is less than your ambition to be interested and to be working in a domain where you really feel like, or an organization where you really feel like you can have a positive impact. So for now, where we are with Aztec, I was talking to someone recently. I've been here 3 years, so I sort of finished my first term in office, kind of feels like, and now I'm sort of gearing up for the second term. We're in the middle of a big transformation program. We've just done a deal, so there's a load of stuff that makes us really interesting. We're growing in the US. We've got an eye on Asia. So for us, and there's a lot to do here because we're growing so rapidly from a tech perspective. We're kind of going from A to B to C in a faster cycle time than maybe historically. So yeah, I'm pretty comfortable that where I am now is offering me a good deal of potential. And by the time I'm 55, 56, maybe non-executive directorships, something like that. Yeah.
So kind of lots for you to do at Aztec. Sounds like obviously any C-level role is demanding, right, and busy. How do you balance professional and personal life? How do you manage that at that level? Or don't you?
I have different names, right, for a start. So I'm Charlotte Light at work, CTO, CDO, professional working person. I'm Charlotte Perryman at home, which is my married name, wife and mother. Look, it's easier now actually than it's ever been, because my son is 17 and he's at boarding school, and then he'll go to university, and so that starts to create a bit less demand on, is the homework done? Is there food in the fridge? Am I paying enough attention to what's happening in terms of sports days or school plays, all those sorts of things? And it's actually creates a bit more time for going to the gym or having a bit more downtime when so at this stage, actually work-life balance, despite the demands of the job, is easier because I have more of my time to be flexible with. When I was younger, certainly with a younger child, and my husband works full time extensively, and at that point was traveling quite a lot, really difficult actually to balance being able to cover everything at work and being able to cover everything at home as well. And actually, I was reflecting with my husband before COVID. He was traveling all over Europe. I was in and out of London every day, and my son needed to be dropped and picked up from the minibus every day. That sort of pinches your day. So at that point, I was sort of having to think, well, if I do this in the morning, work all day, get out of London early, get home, do his tea, go back to work. So you kind of spread your work into the windows where you have the space and time to do it. I think that's a luxury if you've got the ability to do that in your job. Not everyone does. So yeah, it's a constant juggle, but it's definitely easier now than it used to be, which is great, because now my job is the most demanding it's ever been. So almost as the job's got to the point where it's at sort of peak of demanding, my time has freed up alongside that.
Was that an intentional kind of move for you to kind of manage your career progression aligned to your your son's education and age? Was it kind of, or does it not work like that?
In
an ideal world,
I'd call it, it's more of a happy accident. I think it's and I have one child, there are people who have plenty more children where it's sort of even harder. And when my son was young, we had a nanny to help. So that I think you have to make hard choices, that you have to choose what level of ambition you've got. You have to choose what type of mother or parent you want to be. And you have to sort of make a determination whether the amount of time that you're able to give to the things that are outside of work is enough that it satisfies your kind of life choice for that. I can certainly and have observed before that if I had had more children, which would have taken more time, I may not have the job that I have today, because to be the sort of mother I would have wanted to be, I think I would have had to commit more time to that, and that would have allowed me to spend less time on my career. So there's a lot of, can women have it all? Well, I don't think so. I think, and men too, you have to make hard choices about what sits well with you and what you want for your life's experience to be. And then that's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah,
it's good advice though. It's worked out okay.
Yeah, it is good advice. Just that, some of these life decisions, you have to make a choice, unless you end up like me and have twins when you don't have a choice, because two come at once. But I do think that that's really, really important. And obviously, look, we know gender diversity at leadership level within technology is a challenge. Do you find it harder as a woman to operate at a sort of C-level in a business?
I don't, and I don't because I've been fortunate to work in businesses where there has always been good diversity at the top, and from a leadership perspective. There was a female CEO at Bupa when I was working there. Women are well represented at Specsavers, on the board and in senior positions when I was there. And at Aztec, we have a female CEO, a female COO, a female CPO, and myself. In fact, yes, we have more women than men on our executive board, which is pretty unusual for an FS firm. I do think in tech, there's still a diversity issue from a gender perspective, but I don't think that's driven by, I think it's something that's only going to change over time, because you need to have the pipeline of skills. Now, I don't come from a technical background, but obviously you need, a lot of people who go into technology will have. Technology doesn't necessarily seem accessible, I don't think, to women who don't have, there's a perception that you have to be a technologist to be in technology, certainly to be a leader. And then I think, there's a little bit about family. So if women if you take time out for family, that does sort of put you a little bit further back, and you've then got a little bit of catching up to do. And so I think there's this really complex issue. And the worst thing in the world is to be over promoted and find yourself in a position where you've been promoted in order to try and make the numbers, but actually underneath that, it's bad enough being a leader with imposter syndrome. If your imposter syndrome is real, that's kind of even worse. So I think it's a really complicated landscape, that's not just about the sort of pipeline of people coming through, but about all of those other things that layer into that. And there is, I think, in tech, not necessarily historically the most inclusive environment because of that sort of gender disparity. But again, organizations now are focusing so much more on culture and creating an environment that is sort of broadly inclusive, that's extending across the whole organization, including technology. And certainly I work really hard at making sure that the department I run is sort of respectful of sort of all forms of diversity, and creates a culture where people feel broadly accepted, for whatever aspects of their person or life require some level of diverse thinking.
Yeah. And obviously talking about how you've gone about, I guess, building and retaining that diverse team. It would be great if you could share some steps that you and Aztec have taken as a business to be able to do that perhaps other people can benefit from hearing about.
Yeah, I mean, but prior to Aztec, Channel 4 was a really good example of an organization that focuses really heavily on diversity. I mean, it's part of the brief, right, in terms of what Channel 4 is all about. But one of the things that we did there was training around subconscious bias.
Okay.
And it's one thing to sort of think about and talk about bias and subconscious bias, but when you actually do the training, it's quite nerve-wracking actually, because you don't want to feel like you've got prejudice in any way, or that you've got some subconscious bias that sort of makes you a terrible person who's sort of got discriminatory thoughts. So you're sort of completing this training, but actually just the process of going through the training really makes you think about, what your inherent prejudices might be, or it just gives you a few sort of areas where you think, okay, you need to be a little bit thoughtful or cautious, sort of in terms of your historical mindset, your learned, inherent thinking about different people from different walks of life. At Aztec, there's a really strong set of values that sort of focus on the culture in terms of being caring and being thoughtful, and making sure that you're collaborating, that we're sort of collaborating with each other well, and really, it's called the bright alternative as a sort of tagline for the firm. And in financial services, it can be sort of perceived as being an industry that is tough and sort of typically very male and very competitive. Whereas actually the culture at Aztec is very much about creating teams and looking at cohesion and how those teams can be brought together.
So it sounds like that combination of that foundation of training at Channel 4 that really changed your thought process, and then being in a culture where there's key values that are genuine values that people hang their hat on, as opposed to just a box ticking exercise, which I guess happens in a lot of businesses. And I think, and you said it was called Bright. Did you say the Bright Away?
Bright Alternative, yeah.
Bright
so
Alternative.
we're an alternative fund administrator, but we're the Bright Alternative. So
okay,
yeah. Caring as a key part of our values is about being caring and being inclusive. So I think if an organization genuinely has that, and it comes from the top, very much comes from the founder CEO, which Catherine's our new CEO, but the previous CEO, Edward, he definitely created the culture as being reflective of his values, and his values sort of are very much all about the people. And our business is people, right? We're essentially a professional services business. So if we don't have the best people and we don't treat them really well and they don't want to stay, then we're not going to be able to provide the best services. And that's what the company's all about. I've been in situations or in organizations where I've either worked for someone or I've been working with people in an environment where I haven't felt comfortable. And I know that I've not given my best in those scenarios. And so, and I felt that quite tangibly. So I'm definitely, when I look at my team and how I operate within the company, because of that sort of personal experience, I definitely don't want anyone to be feeling that when they're working for me or sort of within my team. So I'm very much thinking about, what do people need to feel safe?
And did you feel uncomfortable because of your gender, or what was the reason why you felt uncomfortable?
Well, I think in some in some cases it's been about the dynamic of the relationship. So right. Where I found myself originally working for someone where the relationship is good and the style is complementary, and then I found myself maybe working for someone where they lack authenticity or the style sort of conflicts. They have a degree of formality. I'm really informal in my mode of operating. I find it very difficult to operate if someone demands me to try and formalize my approach too much in order to conform with something that they need. And so in those circumstances, that's been difficult. Or, moving into a new industry, moving into media was difficult because a lot of the people who work in media have always worked in media.
Yeah.
And I moved into media having no media credentials at all. And that was, you can almost sort of feel people say, oh, you're not from a media background. So initially that can feel quite exclusive. And, fortunately at Channel 4, they do a huge amount to sort of break that down and create a culture that is really inclusive. But some of that's me and how I feel, but then it certainly makes you think about, okay, well, I don't want to make people who are moving into Aztec, who like me aren't from financial services, feel like that's an issue for them.
And how did you overcome that when you had that, I guess, that differentiator between you and your manager or leader at the time, and there was that definite divide in terms of how you like to work and how they like to work? How do you overcome that? Is that not something you can fix? Is it kind of you have to go and find something that you're more aligned to, or is there a way around that? Because I guess that must happen a lot.
Yeah, for me, there in one instance, I knew I wasn't going to be able to be myself, do my best work working for someone because their style was going to require me to operate in a different way. And in that scenario, I got a different job. And then in another scenario, I found myself working for someone where it would have been my responsibility to reflect their position and their messaging around the strategy to my team, but I didn't buy into it. And so I would have to be inauthentic in cascading that to my team. And so again, I left. So I think if you find yourself in circumstances where in order to be successful and do your best work and therefore feel really rewarded about the work that you're doing and feel like you're really making a contribution, if you find yourself working in an environment where you can't achieve that, especially if it's because you're working for someone where you don't think you can achieve that, I think you either have to accept the quality of your work is going to be compromised, or that you're going to have to behave or operate in a way that you feel a bit uncomfortable with, or you're going to have to find somewhere where that's not the case.
I think that conflict with your inner value system, personally for me, I just don't think that's something you can compromise. I know that people don't always have a choice, obviously depending on their personal situation, but I think it's something you have to really seek somewhere else.
And I never left till I had another job. Yeah, so you kind of suck it up for a while. But I think there's a lot of, I think if you're ambitious and you want to achieve and you have a criteria of what success looks like for yourself, and you find yourself operating in circumstances or an environment where you can't be successful against what you need, then you have to make the choice. And I think there are plenty of people who sort of feel like, oh, well, the organization needs to solve this problem for me. But my position would always be, you're the one with the choice. You need to back yourself. You've got the skills. You know how you want to operate. I think it's important that we spend so much time at work, so much of our life at work. If you're spending that time being miserable or operating in a way where you don't feel like you're able to be yourself and get the best from yourself, you're really wasting your time.
I guess that comes back to what you said earlier, that you've got to be willing to make those hard decisions. I think to get to a certain level in your career, tricky decisions have to be made, and they're not always pleasant to make. Or
no, but it feels good to take control for yourself, because often in those positions you're sort of feeling like, oh, I've lost control of my time, or I've lost control of how I want to operate. And it's empowering to say, you know what, I know what I need for me. I know what I've got to offer. I know there's somewhere out there that's going to really value that. So I'm going to go and find that. It's empowering to do that for yourself.
I'm sure there's been lots of people that have had a really positive influence on your career. Is there anybody that's really inspired you or kind of influenced your career in a certain direction, and how, that you could share?
There's a guy called John Lister. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, but I first worked with him at Bupa, where he was the CIO. And so when I left IBM, I was it was suggested to me by a colleague from IBM, actually, who'd gone on to work at Bupa, that I should maybe go and think about working there. And so I went for an interview, and I had an interview with John. And there was a sort of instant sort of positive connection in terms of the dialogue. So we sort of went through started with the sort of formal interview questions, and I was in my 30s, so still fairly early in my career. And we got halfway through the questions, and we were having quite a good exchange. And then HR guy asked me a question, and John was like, "Oh, that's such a boring question. Like, what's your favorite film?" And so we talked about my favorite film, which was Papillon, he was like, "Oh, that's a great film." And then we went on a massive segue, and we probably spoke for another half an hour. And at the end of the half an hour, he sort of said to Adrian, just make the paperwork happen. And Adrian was like, "You're supposed to keep the powder dry." And so we had this sort of great initial meeting. And I subsequently went to work for Bupa. Didn't work for him directly, but worked as part of his team. He then subsequently went to Specsavers. And so when I left Bupa, he was a good mentor and leader to go and work for at Specsavers. And again, didn't work for him directly initially. But he was one of those people who was very clear in any interactions that I had with him that he could see my potential. And there's nothing more motivating than working for someone when you know they can see the potential that you've got yourself, but don't necessarily always believe in. And so he was very much someone like that, who would give me sort of wise counsel. And just looking at the way that he operated, always tried to be fair, sometimes had a few prima donna tendencies, but really smart, also a bit of a generalist. Had worked in lots of different places, really good leader, very authentic, just someone that you think, if I could end up being a leader who operated like that, who could build a leadership team like that, then that would be really powerful. And so even after he left Specsavers, and then I went off to Channel 4, we stayed in touch over the years. And as I contemplated job moves, or in the situations where I'd find myself thinking, I don't really want to do this anymore, was always someone where if I rang up and said, "Right, let me take you to lunch, I need to pick your brains about X, Y, or Z," would make himself available and come and meet, even when he was going through cancer treatment and various other things. So he would definitely be one of those people who's been not only instrumental in helping me develop my career, but influential in making me think about how I would want to operate.
Obviously, having a mentor is hugely valuable. That sounded like that was quite a natural process, how you kind of found that relationship with John, and it kind of stood the test of time. Do you mentor anyone yourself? Is that a role that you do now?
I have done over the years. I don't have a mentor specifically right now. There's someone at the firm who we have an informal sort of mentee situation. But yes, I've sort of formally mentored other people over the course of the career. I do think actually they're more informal relationships where you find someone that you naturally connect with, and then have a sort of ongoing dialogue is sometimes more useful. I think the mentor-mentee construct works when it's formalized, but if there's a sort of specific objective, and it requires the mentee to be quite clear about what it is they're trying to achieve in order for you as a mentor to be able to give them good advice and provide them with a good steer. So yes, it's interesting, and at the moment we're running a reverse mentoring pilot at Aztec, looking at where you have more junior members of staff from different divisions, providing their insight to more experienced or more senior leaders, which I think is a really interesting dynamic. And I certainly have, so one of the things that I do with my team is I have a kind of voice from the floor session where I sit with anywhere between, depending on who's available, sort of 4 to sort of 12 of the members of my team to just come and unload on what's working, what's not working. So we do the staff surveys and all those sorts of things, but that's really just let's sit down, come and tell me what hurts right now, and let's see if these things are on my radar, and making sure that we can fix them.
And it sounds like you've created a safe space for people to feel comfortable to share that. Do people share good, bad, and indifferent with you in those sessions?
Increasingly, they do. I think you have to remember. I remember. I find it funny sometimes to be in a position where people think of me as someone who's sort of in charge and therefore slightly intimidating, because you don't see yourself in that way. But I definitely remember how I used to feel when I was at lower levels in organizations and teams, and I would suddenly be in front of the person who was running the department, and I had to think of, I would be like, oh God, well, if I ask a stupid question or say something that makes this person really cross or ruin my career or anything else, you forget when you become a leader that that's how you used to feel when you were talking to people who are now you. And so I try very much to unpick that a little bit, and not be someone who's sort of remote or intimidating, or to be kind of feared in some way because I happen to run the department. But it's really easy to lose sight of that, because as your sort of scale of responsibility increases. So I think it's important to remember why it was you didn't ask questions when you were sort of in the whole team sort of open floor thing, and it was because you didn't want to ask a stupid question or look foolish in front of your peers or say something that was going to be awkward or difficult. So that's still, to me, sort of how can I make myself as accessible as possible, and I think it's by being as natural as possible. If people see you sort of with your I'm in charge persona, they're less likely to ask you a question than if they say, oh, that's Charlotte being Charlotte. So
and hopefully some of your team will watch this today and know that you were there and shared those feelings of, gosh, I can't ask that because I'm gonna look like an absolute wally.
Yeah.
Even though you're desperate to ask it, but you just don't quite want to do that.
Yeah.
So looking ahead then for you as CDO at Aztec, what are your top 3 priorities over the next 12 months for technology?
Well, so the team is always first.
Okay.
So we're growing really fast. We're expanding into new geographies. The team is constantly under pressure. So making sure I have the right people, making sure I've got the right mix of new people coming in and internal people being promoted, and then understanding what their pain and friction points are and how I can make some of them go away. That's always number one, because if you're running technology, essentially what you're doing is running a team of people who are really smart, doing really complicated, difficult things that no one else in the organization really understands. And so your job is to try and create the conditions for them to do that as easily as possible. So I think that's number one. The second would be really understanding what our clients are looking for.
Right.
So our proposition, our market has historically been probably a little bit behind in terms of tech adoption, but is going through a period of rapid acceleration and investment, and our competitors are definitely investing aggressively. We're investing aggressively. So, but we only have so much in terms of capacity, and you can only do so much concurrently. So really understanding what do our clients see as the important things for us to technologically enable. What do we need to automate? What reports need to be provided? What systems do they want to have us in place? That's understanding that and then prioritizing that's important. And then data, figuring out data services. So historically, probably tech has been a lot about applications. You buy applications to do stuff. There are now so many applications and so many different variances of applications, and so many processes that cross different applications, that the real thing organizations, and whether it's us as an organization or our clients, are looking for is data and information outputs. Now it used to be you'd get your data out of an application, so you'd have your application, you'd run a report. Now increasingly you need to look at reports that take data from lots of different applications. So we've got a data strategy that's built around, we've developed a data platform, we're building capability, data quality governance and culture program. And so a lot, I think, we'll be looking at how do we take all that aggregated data now and and produce sort of insight and services. And then when you sort of put, didn't want to mention AI in this, but when you put AI on top of
I was
that,
going to ask you
can't really ignore it.
Yeah.
But so I think that data services, provision of information and insight, and looking at how that's going to evolve, that's probably the third.
And are you seeing a big shift then in the skills and the people that you're hiring within your teams to be much more data focused? Is that kind of the trend that you're seeing across your business?
To an extent, I think yes, in that we're looking at that extensively within my team, but also, we're looking at as technology has become so much more accessible and sort of it's pervasive into every aspect of a business now, our employee base are far more tech literate than the employee base, I don't know, say 5-10 years ago would have been. So their expectation and their demand of technology is much greater. And one of the things we need to look at is, so to what extent can we almost, I wouldn't opt in a highly regulated industry where security is paramount, going to a totally decentralized model where we have business users who can have really free access to systems and data to be able to service clients is not a model that I can advocate for. But I certainly want to get to something a bit more federated. So where we have a team who are servicing a specific client, for them to have someone who's sophisticated in their data use to be able to use Power BI and do sort of analytics and reporting rather than having to come to someone in my team to do it. I'd absolutely like to get to there. So, so within my team, yes, we've built a much broader set of skills around data, but actually looking at how do we start to introduce people with those skills or develop those people who have those skills in our business functions to be able to take on some of that work is a direction of travel.
And what is it that keeps you up at night as you're trying to transform your business? What are the key worries for you as a CDO?
It's the quantum of work we have both to run and operate our existing service provision, but then also do all of our various transformation projects. I'll sort of frequently wake up and think, how can I balance all of that? And it's not so much how can we do it all, it's how can we do it all well? Because we can definitely do it all, but I want to do it all efficiently, and I want to do it all to a high quality, and I want to do it all in line with people's expectations, which is totally unrealistic because there's no way that can happen. But as someone who's got a pretty high level of ambition and is a bit of a perfectionist, my challenge is frequently trying to sort of balance what does good enough look like. And so I'll definitely wake up thinking, okay, how are we going to fix being able to do X, Y, and Z all brilliantly, all together? Also, no one complains about anything, which is also completely unrealistic because people rarely spend time saying, oh, network was brilliantly fast today. They'll always come and tell you, oh, email's really slow and Teams isn't working.
So do you think then, as a CIO, done is better than perfect is a motto that you have to live by? Or
I think 80-20. I think you have to go for 80-20. Now there are exceptions to that, right? We're implementing a banking system which is going to make payments. They have to be 100% right 100% of the time. So that's at one end of the spectrum. But you can't then apply that. You have to be circumspect about other things where getting 80% of the way there is probably good enough, but it's always on balance of risk.
Yeah.
That's
a toughie when you're a perfectionist to accept some of those things.
Well, and it means the bar you set. Well, the bar I set for myself was incredibly high, and across everything. Like, it's not just across work. You need to be the best mother as well, and the best wife, and the best cook, and the best at everything. It's a facet of being a bit competitive. Probably a facet of having two brothers, actually. Right. But I think that over the years, I've learned to sort of know when I need to sort of switch that on and make sure that we're getting to, because something needs to be absolutely right, and where actually we need to just cut some slack and set the bar a little lower.
Mm-hmm. And do you think you've perhaps faced certain challenges or setbacks in your career that has allowed you to have that mindset now? Are there any examples of things that have gone wrong that have really changed your thinking?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple of things actually. From a personal perspective, we only had one child, and that's not because we didn't try and have other children. It's just that didn't play out. And that didn't play out. That was something I couldn't control. So that was in my mid-30s, quite a tough. Up until that point, most things had gone right, and if they didn't go right, I could make them go right. And when you get to the point when it's something like having children, you can do all the right things and it can still not work. So I think that was it was a difficult period personally, but I had to reach a point of deciding either we're going to carry on trying to have a baby and probably we won't be married in 5 years' time, or we can decide to stop that and I can accept that this family is the shape of family that I'm going to have and get comfortable with that. And having come from a family with sort of two brothers and, my brother's got 4 children and this sort of big family, that was quite a difficult thing to force myself to accept. But it was the first time I'd had to force myself to sort of accept a set of circumstances in a scenario that I wouldn't have necessarily picked for myself. So I think that's a sort of deep and meaningful enough experience to then have that spill over into your work life when you're thinking about, okay, so there are things you can control and there are things actually that you can't control. And if you try and control everything, you're still not necessarily going to be able to make it go right. I think from a work perspective, I had a big project at one of the organizations I worked at that I was responsible for, and it went wrong. And it had gone wrong the first time the organization tried to do it, and then I was put in charge of it, and then it went wrong again. And I just wanted nothing more than to leave so that I didn't have to deal with the fallout of telling the board there was going to be a write-off and dealing with the supplier and going through all the sort of unraveling of who's to blame and how we're going to resolve this financially and all that sort of stuff. And so I applied for lots of jobs and interviewed and kept almost getting a new job, but not quite. And then all the time I was having to deal with this dreadful project that was a constant reminder of, oh, Charlotte, you failed. Whereas, yes, it was a failure, but it was a sort of culmination of lots of different things. But actually going through that process of accepting this project has failed, it's partly my fault, it's partly the other organization, we're going to have to go through that, I'm going to have to face into that humbling and learning experience that means I wouldn't be as good at my job now if I hadn't gone through that process. It would have been much easier at the time to just leave and kind of like be, I'm not going to deal with it. But actually, I've done a few sort of speeches and things to different forums that talk about failure and the learning that you can get from failure. You don't learn much from the things that come easy. You learn how good it is to feel like you've won and you've done something really good, but it doesn't feed into sort of making you more thoughtful about decisions you might make in future. Whereas when you screw something up and it goes badly wrong, you learn so much about the things that you would do differently if you had your time again, because you spend more time being reflective and thinking about, yeah, well, I definitely wouldn't do that again. And I definitely take more time on this. And I'd definitely be less rash about decision making about this aspect. So yeah, they're probably the two things that together have helped me get to a place where I can accept that A, I'm going to mess stuff up, and B, I can't force everything to go the way that I want it to go.
Yeah, oh, it's so interesting. I had IVF to have my children, hence why I ended up with twins. And exactly the same as you, I've always been able to achieve anything I wanted until I hit mid-30s and couldn't have a baby. And suddenly it was out of my control. And nothing's ever been out of my control before that. So it was a big learning curve. But I think, you're right. If anybody reflects back, the biggest learns you have in work and life are usually out of your comfort zone at the time. it's not really an enjoyable experience that you go through.
No, but it's a kind of triumph over adversity sort of thing, isn't it? It's and also back to the point I made earlier, sometimes it's about just taking control of a situation and making your decision. So the decision we made to stop trying for a baby, a second baby, that was an active decision. And up until that point, you're worrying and angsting about what decision am I going to make, or what should we do, or how might this. But once you actually actively make a decision, it sort of puts you back on a more stable situation. It puts you back in control a little bit of a situation that has previously felt way outside of your control, and that's empowering in and of itself, sort of as a mechanism for moving forward.
Yeah, it comes back to your advice about those big, bold decisions that are uncomfortable to make.
Yeah.
Thinking about your, I guess, final bits of advice that you would give our audience that might be listening or watching today, about how to achieve a C-level role in technology. Are there any kind of, I guess, golden nuggets or tips that you would perhaps like to share, that, you know, maybe one or two? That big decisions one, I'm gonna that's definitely key.
I mean, I think when you're early in your career, just there will always be opportunities to put your hand up, to try stuff, or to take additional things on. Definitely do it. You know, my very first job, I was a project assistant at IBM, working on a automated immigration project, an innovation project that they had, where at some point someone needed to really take responsibility for the whole pilot program, which happened to be in Bermuda. So, you know, my hand sort of shot up at that point and said, right, you know, there's a problem here, I can do it. I wasn't completely unproven, but I think if you sort of confidently say, I want to take that on, I can do that, then you know, leaders will be looking for people who are willing to say that, and they won't expect everything to be perfect, and they won't expect you to be able to do it without any support. But what you're looking for is someone with that attitude of, yeah, I can do that. And by putting your hand up, you will then expose yourself to a range of different experiences that you won't necessarily get if you just stay squarely in your lane. So I think one would be, you know, put your hand up to sort of take on that, and it might be harder work and you might not get paid for it, but actually it'll pay for itself in the end. Another would be not to underestimate soft skills as being leadership skills. So the ability to communicate, the ability to get on with people, being practical, organized, you know, a lot of mum skills actually are really good leadership skills, because when you're leading, you're basically trying to corral a load of sort of slightly rogue initiatives and activities into something that can then be easily communicated up the line within a sort of, to say we're doing these activities within this financial envelope within this sort of time period, which is kind of like running a term of school kids. So I think, you know, those are and they're innate skills for some people, but not for everybody. I think because if you're good at being organized and a good communicator and good at relationships, you assume, oh yeah, but you don't have to have a degree to do those things, so you undervalue them. But not everyone's good at those things. So if you're good at those things, they're really important from a leadership perspective. And then the final thing would probably be to really sort of think about, if you want to be a leader in technology at an executive board, you need to be able to explain any concept to the executive board as if you're explaining it to your sort of 77-year-old mother. So that ability to distill high complexity technical concept into a neat story that allows the executive board to quickly understand that, you know, what's the situation, what's complex about it, and what decision needs to be made, or what problem needs to be resolved, is really important. And I think it didn't used to be. You used to be able to be a CTO or a CIO and be very technically capable and come and sort of wow people with all your jargon and how much clever technology stuff that you knew, and people would sort of sign the check to sort of make you go away and go and implement it. But actually now executive boards really want to understand what's happening with technology, and you need to be able to explain it without lapsing into weeds and jargon, which is sometimes where I think I have an advantage because I don't understand the full depths of the technical complexity. My guys have to explain it to me sufficient that I understand it, and then I can simplify it further to make sure the executive board understand it. But putting it into really plain English, I think that's really important when you work in tech, because people want to understand, but they'll switch off really quickly if you start to sort of lapse into jargon talk.
That's great advice, and hopefully beneficial to people that have been watching. One final question. So throughout this podcast series, we always ask our guests to leave a question for the next guest. This question came from Sadish, who is the CTO at TransUnion, CIO, sorry, at TransUnion. And he has asked, what advice would you give or have given your 20-year-old self?
Back yourself. Just back yourself and ask for more money sooner. Like, women are terrible at asking for more money. So we undervalue ourselves. We're sort of cautious about job descriptions, and we sort of go for a nominal pay rise because it seems rude to ask for any more. But definitely, I would say back yourself and ask for more money sooner.
Amazing. Amazing advice. Charlotte, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me today and joining me on this podcast.